Hey everybody, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. This is going to be like the most seamless integration between two episodes. If you haven't listened to yesterday where we're talking about the end of Matthew chapter 24, the Olivet Discourse, just go catch that one because it's just going to roll super neatly into what happens after this little bit of music that Jeff plays right here. Here, Jesus is employing the language to say the Son of Man is coming back. And right now, the Son of Man is telling you that you need to be eyes up and you need to be ready for this impact that is coming. And implicitly, the assumption is some people are going to hear this and they are going to orient themselves in conscious ways and subconscious ways to the reality of the unfolding of history Jesus has just described throughout Matthew 24. Others are going to hear it. They're going to be like, Jesus sounds cool. Kingdom values are mostly good sometimes, I guess. Fine, that's great. But I don't really care to or see the need or urgency to live my life consciously and subconsciously with this kingdom notion, this kingdom value of how the unfolding of history is going to go and that there is an end game here. And Jesus is describing that as being the height of foolishness. And further, I just don't think these two passages are that hard in this regard. Jesus says, therefore, keep watch. That's all you guys need to know. A lot of people read these passages in Matthew 24, passages like this. There's a corresponding version of this over in Luke. And for whatever reason, historically, when we get into these prophecy, prediction about how time is going to unfold kind of passages, it's like the clear thrust of what is being communicated is just not that tough. It's therefore keep watch because you don't know on what day your Lord will come. The you don't know part is absolutely integral to properly understanding Jesus' instruction. It is precisely because this return will happen. It is precisely because these words will not pass away. It is precisely because there is an unfolding of history that will happen in kingdom terms. And it is precisely because we don't know when, that this orientation of readiness is what makes sense for the individual. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to make these things happen. You don't have to vote certain ways or go have wars or incantations or do church a certain way to trick the Son of Man into coming back or to make someone profane a temple or to crack the code with your facts and figures and science and progress to figure out exactly when the date was, something Jesus apparently doesn't even know. You don't have to do anything to make this unfolding of history happen. The take home is eyes up. Be ready. There's a hit coming. It might, in a sense, be a really good hit, but that impact is coming, and you want to be alert and ready for it. It will change the orientation of the kingdom citizen top to bottom in ways that they recognize, in ways that they don't even think about subconsciously, to live like kingdom people in this world, in this moment, in anticipation of the return of the Son of Man. And that leaves us with just one more nugget, one more payoff from everything we've done digging around in Matthew chapter 24. And that is this question of how Jesus views the relationship between the Father, between God, and between the individual, the kingdom citizen. We talked about this a ton a couple of days ago, but here we are landing the plane on it. As troubling as it is to consider the idea that we would be a slave to anything in the 21st century in the West, the reality is that the Bible, once again, is holding out this notion that everybody is going to be a slave to one of two things. You'll be a slave to sin and consequently a slave to death. Now, I know not everybody believes this. I know not all of you listening believe this. This is just what the text says. And the goal here, the objective is to try to figure out what the text says. You're either going to be a slave to sin and death and just the natural unfolding of how things go in the natural world with the world kingdom doing the destructive, abusive, exploitative things that are going to happen because kings aren't good and governments aren't ultimately good, even though they might occasionally do good here and there. It's a dead end, and it's a dead end that is inescapable that we are slaves to. And I think everybody, religious or otherwise, recognizes this makes sense. We use different words for it historically, the rat race, or an inescapable rut, or general existential malaise, whatever it might be, cynicism. We get beat down over time because what the Bible, I think, is saying here smacks of truth and our lived experience, that being that we are a slave to sin, destruction, death, all of these things, even though we put lipstick on it with our systems and the things that we try to do to make it feel a little bit better going down. But then the words of Jesus and the Bible in general holds out this great big or there's this other kind of slavery. And this is being completely bound up, completely in union with, completely hitched to the fortunes of, the leadership of, the character of, the household of this master of the house who is this good, ultimate, benevolent, gracious, loving father and king. That is God. Now, you'll notice the missing option between the two is the idea that somehow a finite being in a limited body that is constantly being acted upon by the physical forces of the world and breaking down, and that lives for only a very brief time. What's not an option is that such a being who is a slave to physics and entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, such a being cannot truly dictate its own future, cannot truly be its own master. And though we may love Western liberalism and the idea of the importance of the individual and self-ownership, all of those things are very important for public morality, in the ultimate grand scheme of all of existence, that stuff is very short-lived. In the grand scheme of everything, the Bible holds out people as having two options: a slave to sin and death and everything that comes with that, or a slave to the God who invented love and grace and forgiveness and restoration, and the God who is the God of glory and ownership and creativity and the maker of all things and sustainer of all things. And of these two options, one leads to ruin and one leads to this lifetime, and the text holds out the next, being in the household and the good standing of this great king, something that theoretically shouldn't even be on the table. Now, what doesn't compute to us about this dichotomy, of course, is like, well, I don't want to be a slave to anything. And that makes sense given where we are in history and how we think about all of these things. But in the grand historical sense, in the first century sense, this would have registered very quickly with people. Like, well, you can be a servant here, you can be a servant here. This one over here looks like an awesome deal, and I would want to sign up. And so with a bit of thought, I don't find it to be off-putting at all that what Jesus is holding out, how he conceives of the relationship between the kingdom citizen and the king, is one of a slave who has nowhere else to go. And this is it. I mean, this is the best option that could ever possibly be conceived of in this universe or any other universe. But not just a slave. The slave has become a child, a son, a daughter, an heir, an agent, someone who plays a role and has ownership and things to do in this household. So then, it is absolutely a compliment when we get to this final passage in Matthew 24, and Jesus is like, well, who then is the faithful and wise servant or even slave? Well, I want to be that, is what you're supposed to think when you hear it. I want to be in that household with that master, and I want to be useful. I want to contribute because what that master is doing is the truest, realest thing. It's the ultimate project. It's the ultimate engagement for all of human history. And to be given any role or any trust in such a household is a position of unimaginable honor and optimism and meaning and usefulness and existential completion that you can't get anywhere else. This is the ideal situation, and because of that, it only makes sense then that the servant who is oriented to this knowledge that the master is going to return would be doing things all the time that are in keeping with the values of the master and his household. And if you wanted a really easy way to summarize what it looks like to not get that, well, just imagine a servant who doesn't understand the possibility that's in front of them in this role and who isn't interested in the values of the king and somehow imagines himself to be entirely independent from all of that and then uses that independence to do things that range from flippant to outright damaging and evil. In the end, the whole text of the Bible makes it really clear that metaphorically it's better to spend even just one day in the house, in the service of this great master, than 1,000 years anywhere else. Nothing compares. This is the truest, realist thing in all of existence. It's partially realized now as the disciples are listening to what Jesus says in Matthew 24, and it's more completely realized when a person passes from this life into the next, according to the text, and when ultimately all of history moves into the next place it moves, with God as king, and that being abundantly evident to everyone ever. When you know a hit is coming, everything consciously and subconsciously in your body orients to take it better and roll out of it in a way that is productive and good. Yes, I'm using a negative example to illustrate a positive point. Likewise, when the kingdom citizen is eyes up and oriented toward the coming impact of the return of the Son of Man, whenever that might happen to be, it should have this massive trickle-down effect in conscious and subconscious ways that cause the kingdom citizen, that servant of the great master, to be oriented in a way that is right to respond to that moment when it comes. And that is it for Matthew chapter 24. One more chapter in our hip pocket, right? That's the idea. Maybe that one's like maybe a little bit sticking out of our hip pocket, but mostly like kind of in there. A lot of people fight about Matthew 24 real hard. They like each other before they talk about it, and they don't like each other anymore after they talk about it. And that's a pity, because the reality is that everybody who reads Matthew 24 is supposed to come out of it with the same orientation. Oh, I don't know all the stuff, but I know enough to know that I should be eyes up and I should be oriented to it. And so I really appreciate you deciding that we're not going to be in a fight over a difficult chunk of scripture to work through together, and that we can just think about it regardless of what background, theistically or even not theistically, that we're coming from as we work it through. I just continue to think you are very, very cool, and I like doing this with you. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.